Words. Words are what will determine whether or not our marriage thrives or whether our marriage struggles. Words play such a critical part. How do we get our feelings hurt and talk it through and still be okay? There's no doubt that whether or not I'm whole or wise and well will be revealed in how I use my words. And so this issue is really, really critical. There's a Chinese proverb that basically goes like this: it's not fair, but it only takes one misstep to fall off a mountain, and it takes about 20,000 good ones to climb it. If you are not consistently good at words, if you're good with words most of the time, but sometimes you're not, you're going to erode your own marriage. The book of Proverbs says that it's a foolish person who tears down their own house with their own words. And yet many of us who want to have great marriages, what we struggle with is we don't know how to have these hurt feelings and to have differences. It is kind of interesting that when you begin to get married and you move through that dating and engagement, you think the key to marriage probably is how much we have in common and how much we deeply love each other. Yeah, it's really, really important. I'll agree. But the key to living in marriage has to do with discovering that we're not the same, but I'll take good care of you. And it has to do with forgiveness and grace and kindness, especially with our words in the middle of it. Maybe we could subtitle this one, How to Have a Christian Fight. And what I mean by that is there are going to be hurt feelings in a marriage. They just are. We're not clones of each other. There's going to be misunderstandings. It's part of life. The people that have great marriages are the people who figure out how to have those hurt feelings and have those discussions, and they do it in a classy manner. In fact, fight all you want if you want to in a classy manner. It'll actually bond you closer together. But if you're not classy, if you're not mature, if you're not wise in your words, you'll struggle. And so in this session, let's talk about it. How do you process it? I came from a family where anger probably was, in the generations ahead of me, pretty permissible in the family that I came from. There's a passage of Scripture that has been so instrumental. It's instrumental in my father's life and my life. I've seen this passage of Scripture change what I think I would call a family heritage and put it more in a biblical and a far healthier way. We're going to build out of that passage. I think this passage gives me the process by which to work through words. There are three parts to godly speech. There are three parts to healthy speech, or however you want to call it. Those three parts, I think, are found in Ephesians chapter 4. If you want to get your Bibles, Ephesians chapter 4, we're going to start at verse 25, and we're going to work our way to the end of the chapter. When I tell you there are three rules to godly speech, there are three things that make it classy. When I give you the three, I would be shocked if anybody said, wow, I never thought of that one, or never thought of that one, or never thought of that one. No, I don't think that'll be what takes place. You're going to say, yeah, I'm kind of familiar with all three. Here's what I'm going to tell you. You grow up in a culture, you live in a culture that knows these three but does not practice them simultaneously. And if they are not practiced simultaneously, then they are the words of a fool. These three simultaneously are good. These three separately are worthless. For example, you might have a recipe that uses flour and vanilla and shortening. In combination, it turns out to be terrific. But you try serving the flour on Tuesday, the shortening on Thursday, and the vanilla on Saturday, and you haven't served much. It's in their combination. We're in a culture that does not specialize in combining these three together. Maybe you could describe this as three ingredients in a recipe, maybe 3 legs on a stool, 3 braids in a rope. But when I am wise and classy, these three things will always be simultaneously involved. Here they are. Ephesians chapter 4 starts in the 25th verse. Goes like this. Therefore, each of you must put off falsehood and speak truthfully to your neighbor, for we are all members of one body. Don't let in your anger, do not sin. Don't let the sun go down where you're still angry. What's he just said? He started off with this. Here is the first big braid in the rope. Here's the first key ingredient. It goes like this. You be truthful. God has yet to bless the first lie. And if you are not truthful in your relationships with each other, you'll never do anything. You sort of joke and say, well, when are we not truthful? Well, there's only really two times we tend not to be truthful. When we're trying to be kind, we tend not to be truthful. And when we're mad, we tend not to be truthful. But other than that, we do pretty well. What do I mean by that? You watch couples and how they interact with each other. Truth is often one of the things that is sacrificed, believing that kindness is more important than truth. I'm going to use silly illustrations here, but so a wife comes wearing something out, and she says to the husband, how's it look? Oh, the fear of every man. And as she's standing there and wanting an answer, for my scenario, the guy begins to run through his mind going, wow, I could tell her that I don't like it, or makes you look bigger than you want to look, or whatever it is you want to say. But you're going, that isn't going to work well. Because if I say what it is I'm thinking, I'll offend her, I'll make her mad, or maybe it won't make her mad, but what'll happen is she'll want to go back and change, and we're already close to being late. And so a guy sort of sorts through, and he creates this altar of kindness, and the first thing he does is sacrifice truth on it. And goes, well, that got along fine. We got gone, it wasn't the end of the world, nothing bad happens. Here's the problem. Every lie is eventually exposed. Every dishonest thing is eventually come to the surface. You went out that night, nothing bad happened, but what will happen is a few months later, a few weeks later, when you go somewhere that does matter to you, it's the office party or something, and she begins to pull it out, and the guy says, you know, do you have something else? She'll say, why? What's wrong with that? And he goes, well, and again, I'm using a silly illustration, but here's what she will figure out. She figures out you don't always answer according to what you think. You answer sometimes according to what you think I want to hear. And you answer according to what mood you're in. And he's just introduced a new game to his family called 20 Questions. You see, the next night, and again, silly illustration. The next night she wears out something that he does kind of like. And she says, what do you think about it? And he goes, well, I like it. And she goes, no, I can tell you don't like it. I'll go back and change. I can tell the way you said it. And now we start doing our communication off nuances. We begin to do nonverbal communication. Let me flip the illustration. He's somewhere at one of the stores and he finds whatever it is, this XYZ, whatever it is, and man, it's on sale and it's only $300. And he calls his wife and he goes, I know we weren't thinking about that yet, but man, it's such a great price. It's half off. And she's thinking to herself, you got to be crazy. You got to be crazy. We don't have the $300 to spend on that. But she's thinking to herself, but I'm a wife who should be kind. I need to be kind. And he works hard for the money and I should be kind. And she's thinking to herself, but my goodness, we can't afford the $300. But she says what she thinks would be kind. Well, I don't know, hon, whatever you think. If you think it's good, go for it. So he buys it. No big deal. You say, well, yeah, it is. Because a few weeks later, a few months later, when they're working on finances and things are so tight, he will say, I don't understand why we're so tight. And she will say, we've got to stop buying things we can't afford. And he will say, I don't think we are. And she say, well, yeah, we kind of do, the XYZ. And he will turn and say, that's not fair. You told me you thought it was okay. And she's going to go, no, I thought you would know. And so what happens is couples stop communicating honestly. Honesty is absolutely required. You can never advance the depth of your marriage by ranking kindness or anything else above truth. Now stay with me, because we're going to have to put them all together. But families that don't have the courage and integrity to tell each other the truth will end up with nonverbal communication, and now you're reading tea leaves. We tend to be dishonest when we're trying to be kind. We tend to be dishonest when we're mad. Not time to get into specifics on this illustration, but in general, it's very, very hard to be mad at somebody that you don't overstate your case. For example, if a family decide we're going to eat our meals together at the table and we're going to eat more nutritious meals and we're going to stop doing all the snacking stuff and we're going to come and sit down at a table as a family and she works so hard to make that happen and he's been trying to make it happen as well, but I don't know, out of the last 3 weeks, he's been late 3 times in this meal we went together, and it's pretty hard for her not to be mad and not overstate her case. Just the human nature. And so she begins to say things like, I can't count on you. You tell me you're going to do one thing and you don't do another. Meanwhile, he remembers all these nights he's fought so hard to get out of work on time, and 3 times he didn't do it well, but he seems to get no credit for anything he's trying, and it seems to be this sentence of, you're not trying hard, you're not, and these words like always and never and overstatements like crazy are used. She's trying to make a point, but in his mind it's dishonest. It's an exaggerated point. We tend to do that when we tend to be dishonest when we're trying to be kind and when we're mad. And so we end up violating verse 25. There's a third time in here we tend to be dishonest. When we're mad, when we're kind. It's also when we withhold truth. Withholding truth is a common thing. Ultimately, what can happen is just make it a coworker with me. That coworker, I hurt their feelings. And what they owed it to me, remember verse 25, speak the truth. Verse 26 says speak the truth today, even if you're angry, but don't sin in your anger. I hurt my coworkers' feelings. What they should have done is come back in, close the door, sit down and said, yeah, man, I'm struggling with something. But for this scenario, let's have them, they went down the hallway and I don't know how but they just ticked, just mad. And truth was withheld. And so when they come back and I see them, I go, everything okay? Yeah, just busy, got a lot on my mind. Meanwhile, they're thinking on the inside, you jerk, if you don't know, well, I'm going to tell you. Wouldn't matter to you anyhow, you're kind of bullying. And suddenly they begin to play a little speech in their mind. Bitterness. This is really important. Bitterness is fed by several things, but one of the primary things bitterness is fed by is truth withheld. You withhold truth, and the little green monster of bitterness begins to rise in your pocket. And you don't have to give it long, 12 hours, 24 hours, 36 hours, little speeches that play in your head. And bitterness comes. Whenever bitterness comes, it destroys the ability for us to take good care of each other verbally. It's interesting, at least to me, that when bitterness comes, 3 things occur. You let me be embittered at you, or you a little embittered at me, where we practice and play these little speeches in our mind. Here's 3 things that'll happen. The emotions go up, the logic goes down, and the facts get fuzzy. What's that mean? So if I really offended my coworker, and they didn't come tell me that day, or even the next day, when it finally comes to the surface, here's what will happen. When they come in to talk with me, I'm kind of surprised that their hands tremble like they do. Their voice trembles. And I'm going, where's this extra emotion coming from? It's because the emotions go up. The logic goes down. We begin to talk it through, and I go, oh, I am so sorry. Man, that's not what I meant to have happen at all. And I begin to explain my logic. Now, my logic may be wrong, but their ability to even track with my logic begins to fall apart. I will say, does that make sense? And they will say, no, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. Because their logic is no longer A, B, C, D, and they can't even follow my logic. We know when somebody is inebriated, their coordination is impaired. When somebody's embittered, their logic is impaired. I promise you. Their ability to see the world through your eyes breaks down. My ability to see it through yours. No, the emotions went up, the logic went down. And here's the real key. The facts get fuzzy. What happens is our brains, our minds are a little bit like a jailhouse lawyer. And what I mean by that is you let something happen, my mind will just spin the facts and spin them and spin them and spin them. And what it will do is it has a bias. My mind will embellish any fact that helps my case, and my mind will diminish or push away any fact that hurts my case. So we can't even agree on history. So we're talking in 10 days, 2 weeks later, and I'm saying, well, if you remember, this is how it happened. And they're going, that's not how it happened. Don't tell me that's how it happened, because this is, and we can't even agree on history. I'm sick and tired through the years of my secretary holding babies on her lap and looking after toddlers in the room next to me while parents and marriages fought it out, almost blood on the carpet in my office. And we couldn't even get to the issues because embitterment had caused excess emotion, decreased logic, and changed historical facts. Don't trust yourself. You be careful. Well, you know what the antidote is to bitterness? It's forgiveness. Everybody always says, talk something out with an embittered person. Well, you can go to a certain place, but at some point in time, bitterness, its only antidote is forgiveness. So how do we do this? We start with forgiveness. Forgiveness is where we go. Truth. That's the first great braid in the rope, is truth. Without truth, we'll go nowhere. But truth by itself can never stand alone. In fact, if you find somebody who says, well, at least I'm an honest person, run to the hills. Run for your life. Because somebody who says, well, at least I'm an honest person, and doesn't weave the other things in, they're harsh. When I was in college, the man who was in charge of all the chemicals that was used by the school to clean things, I came from a science background. I'm a little curious about things. He has a pint-sized jar and a pint-sized jar and a pint-sized jar. And he had this 2-gallon jar of chemicals and then another pint-sized jar. And I asked him, I just out of curiosity, what's the big jar for? And he said, oh, I can't use that for anything. Well, that makes a lot of sense. Why do you have so much of it and so little of, what do you mean? And then he kind of winked and he said, it's my base chemical. I take this and mix with it to do that job. I take this one and mix with it to do this job. Truth will always be the base chemical. You have to start with truth. But if you only use truth, what you're probably doing is being harsh and bullying. Verse 29. Verse 29 says, let no unwholesome words proceed out of your mouth, but only words that build up, only words that edify. You give grace to those who hear. How are you supposed to be ticked at somebody? And you're ticked at somebody and you tell them you're hurt and you're mad and you're offended. How do you set them higher? Down here where they are, but when I finish this conversation, you can be setting higher. We don't know how to do that. We go the other way. If I'm ticked with you, I know how to grab you up here and put you down here where I know how to pop your balloon, burst your bubble, cut you down to size, put you in your place. You know how to grab somebody up here and put them down here. Here's what Paul says. When you speak to somebody, their worth and value, their dignity better be set higher. And so I am out of line. I don't care what somebody did to me. I am out of line. If in my speaking the truth, I do not take them and set them higher. We'll talk about how to do that in a second, but I want to make a real caution. If you're somebody who has a tendency to speak the truth, but you think you make up for it by edifying later, you might have popped off at somebody. You might have said what you shouldn't have said. You kind of gave this little attack on your wife or your husband, but you kind of made up for it later. I just want to remind you, you're self-deceived. What you actually have is an abuser's pattern. Somewhere around your house, I don't know where, but somewhere around your house in the last day or two, some mama slapped her 5-year-old child way too hard. She got way too mad and she slapped that child and threw that child into bed. And that baby, that little 5-year-old's crying and all the things that go with it. And that mom left that room going, I'm not a bad mama. I'm not a bad mama. This is her fault. I warned her not to. I told her not to. This is her fault. But all night long, that little nagging question, am I a bad mama? And so the next morning, that mama will wake up that 5-year-old bright and cheery and say, hey, you want to go to McDonald's and play in the balls and play on the nets? And the little 5-year-old is happy to do that because that's what they know for their world. And so they take them to McDonald's and the mom says, see, I'm not a bad mama. See, bad mamas wouldn't take their child to go play like this. It's an abuser's pattern. If you're somebody who says hard things to people, truth, but at the same time, their dignity wasn't protected, all you are really is a bit of a verbal abuser's pattern. And here's what will happen. People just begin to fence you off. Your kids will, your spouse will, your coworkers, they just fence you off. If I were to tell you that water fountain, they're at work, you know that water fountain over the corner over there? 90% of the time, 95% of the time, 98% of the time, it's good water. Good water. Now, 2% of the time, 5% of the time, I don't know. It's for some reason, we haven't been able to figure out why. It siphons sewage water out. We don't know why. We've had plumbers look at it, but it siphons sewage back out. But it's mostly good water, occasionally sewer water. Don't worry, though. We'll put a sign up. Would you use the water fountain? No, you won't. Because when you can't trust it, you simply fence it off. You're done. You want to know why many people may simply ignore you? Both the good you do and the firm things you say? It's because that pattern. Here's the second thing that you do. You speak truth, and there's nothing anybody can do, nothing, that I will not intentionally lift up their dignity. The third one is in verse 29. Verse 29 of Ephesians chapter 4 says this: Therefore be tenderhearted, forgiving, just as God in Christ has forgiven you. I know the word humility is not in that verse, but that's what it's talking about. Don't you be more than that far from humility. Don't you be more than that far from how much Christ has forgiven you. I followed a mom through a grocery store one day. I wasn't stalking. I happened to be shopping the same aisles. And she got under her child, and the child needed to be gotten onto, but something bothered me. I couldn't figure what it was. That night, I was with a husband and wife in a fight they were having in my office, and everything that the one said to the other was right, but something bothered me, and it hit me like a ton of bricks as I was going through Proverbs later on that night. The absence of humility taints anything good. Where humility is absent, I don't care how right you are, where humility is absent, everything is ruined. So the simplest thing, that if a coworker has offended me, if my mate or my spouse, the simplest thing in the world is I got to worship just for a second. I got to sit down and go, I need to address this and address it today. But here are three things that are coming out of my mouth. I'm going to speak the truth. They're going to find their dignity protected. And they're going to hear honest humility. When a husband and wife can do that with each other, it's conversations that go like this: Sweetheart, I owe you an apology. When I left this morning, I realized I was ticked, and I realized that I was offended over that. And sweetheart, I want you to know I was wrong not to be upfront with you. And hon, you've forgiven me for enough things. You need to know, as I thought about it today, my goodness, if you never fixed one thing or changed one thing, sweetheart, thank you for how much grace you've given me through the years. And I also know that while I was offended about that one thing, I had the perspective wrong. Who you are matters far more than that thing. But you do need to know that thing bothers me, and we're going to have to figure out how to deal with it. I know that sounds a bit artificial, but what I'm doing is I'm hitting three hooks. Maybe you can see it visually. Three hooks here. All three hooks are truth, edification, and humility. Don't open your mouth till something's on all three. Everybody struggles with one end of that perspective. There's some people for whom truth comes really, really easy, but man, they have trouble with edification and humility. There are other people that, man, humility and edification are easy, but you have trouble speaking truth. It'd take you 3 days to tell your neighbor his house is on fire. We all struggle. But at some point in time, we got to grow up. And when we grow up, it goes like this. I want my words to be a blessing to my marriage. I don't want them to be a stumbling block. And I want to live with wisdom, truth, edification, and humility. May God bless.